The night often hides secrets that most of us never think about as we close our eyes and allow ourselves to drift into rest. But for many people around the world, those who live in remote villages, in farming communities, in forests or grasslands, or even in houses near the edge of expanding cities, the night brings with it more than quiet and stars. It brings the possibility of something sudden, something that has haunted humanity since the earliest times, the flash of scales, the sudden sting of fangs, and the creeping spread of venom. Across continents and across history, snakebite has been one of the most silent yet most devastating dangers to human life. For those who face it, the experience is not only physical, it is deeply psychological, reshaping their understanding of safety, survival, and fate itself. When a snake strikes, the world around the person can instantly change. What was just a walk through fields, or a step into a shadowed corner of a room, can suddenly become the start of a fight for one's life. The venom moves invisibly, and the clock of survival begins to tick. In that fragile moment, every action matters, and often, life is not preserved simply by medical science, but by instinct, choices, and sometimes luck. This documentary is not a catalogue of fears, but of stories. Stories of men, women, and children who faced the fangs of venomous serpents and had their strength tested in the most profound way. Some survived, others did not, but all left behind lessons about how decisions, both right and wrong, can shape the border between life and death. Imagine the hush of a rural evening, when the last rays of the sun disappear behind the fields and the shadows stretch longer over the land. The fields are quiet, the birds whistle their final notes, and a farmer wipes his brow, preparing to walk home. He takes a path he has walked every single day, one that curves between tall grasses and small stones. But hidden in the fading light, pressed still against the earth, is a snake, coiled and waiting not with malice, but with instinct. A single misplaced step can be enough. The strike is faster than thought, a sharp sting at his ankle, so quick that at first it barely seems real. Then, the fear arrives, the awareness that this is no ordinary scrape or thorn, but something far more dangerous. His heart quickens, the blood pulses, and though he cannot yet see the venom in his body, he feels its presence. This is the moment where decisions matter most. Throughout this journey you are about to undertake, we will not dwell only on the scientific terms and clinical explanations, though those will appear in their time. Instead, we will linger in the quiet spaces where memory and fear meet, where choice and consequence intertwine, and where the voices of survivors tell us the truth more deeply than any textbook ever could. Each story is not only about venom, but about resilience, instinct, and the frail line that connects us all to the most primal forces of nature. And as you listen here, in the comfort of your own rest, you will find that the rhythm of their recollections is steady and soft, carrying you gently into sleep, even as the narratives unfold with weight and gravity. There is something uniquely human in the act of telling stories about danger. Our ancestors, as they sat gathered near campfires thousands of years ago, warned each other of the perils of creatures that shared their lands. They passed down not only knowledge of hunting and gathering, but knowledge of survival. They described which snakes moved silently in the grass, which carried deadly venom, and which paths might be safest to tread. These warnings became part of culture, part of the language of protection. In many parts of the world, the snake came to symbolize both death and rebirth, both fear and wisdom. In every symbol, there is memory of danger, and in every story, there is the remembrance of a wound. Today, the voices of those who truly met that danger join the ancient chorus, extending the story of survival into the modern moment. There is a pattern that courses through each account of a snakebite. At first, there is disbelief. Victims often describe that they did not realize the seriousness of what had happened in the first moments. A sharp pain, then confusion, a glance downward, and sometimes only 2 tiny puncture marks, no worse than the prick of a needle. But soon, other sensations follow: heat spreading along the limb, swelling that rises with alarming speed, the feeling that the body is no longer controlled by its owner. Then, the reality sets in, and with it, fear that runs deeper than any other. Voices shout, neighbors gather, decisions are made in panic, and in that chaos, lives can be preserved or lost. We will walk with survivors through those memories, and as they speak softly of decisions that were right or wrong, their words will connect us to the ancient struggle of humans against the venoms of the natural world. The scale of snakebites around the world is often hidden from those who live in urban centers, removed from the fields and forests where such encounters are most common. Yet, according to global health organizations, hundreds of thousands of bites occur every year, leading to tens of thousands of deaths and many more cases of permanent injury. Each statistic is not only a number, but a lived story. Behind every figure is a farmer who can no longer till the soil, a mother whose child was lost, a young man who carries scars both seen and unseen. Their voices linger, though often unheard in the noise of larger global crises. Tonight, we will listen to them, calmly, steadily, as a way of honoring their struggles and also as a way of finding peace, even in the face of fragile mortality. It is worth remembering that not every snake is venomous, and not every venomous snake chooses to strike. Often, they strike out of fear, out of seizing a moment they imagine will keep them safe. They do not know the identity of the person before them, nor the consequences that might follow. In a strange way, the encounter is one of mutual vulnerability, the human vulnerable to venom, the snake vulnerable to the presence of a towering figure in the grass or on the path. This is the meeting of two beings, each carrying ancient survival strategies written into their bodies over millions of years of evolution. And so, the stories of survivors are not only about danger, but about the delicate, often tragic intersection of two lives crossing paths in an instant of chance. As you hear these accounts, you might imagine yourself in their places. You might feel the stillness of an evening, the sudden crack in rhythm when danger intrudes, the rush of fear that changes how you breathe. You may see in your mind the faces of family members who ran to help, the makeshift cloths tied in desperation, the hurried movements toward the nearest road or hospital. And then you will also imagine the relief when survival is certain, when healing takes place, when voices can once again laugh and tell of their ordeal. The space between those moments, the narrowness of that passage between danger and safety, is the heart of everything we will explore. Even though the subject is heavy, the telling of it here is meant to be gentle and reflective, like a stream of quiet water flowing past stones. While venom can darken veins and bring pain, the act of remembering and sharing the stories brings clarity and calm, like the dawn that comes after night. As you continue to drift deeper into this introduction, know that the voices that follow are not here to frighten you, but to accompany you into rest, carrying lessons of survival in their slow cadence. Our world is full of both danger and beauty, and by listening to those who have lived between the two, we remind ourselves that to live at all is to walk that fine line with awareness. So as we begin this long journey together tonight, let the sound of these words be a guide into sleep. The stories of snakebite survivors are stories of being human, fragile in body, but resilient in spirit. They speak of unpredictability, of destiny, of chance. They speak of wrong turns and right choices, of pain endured and of life preserved. And though their fangs and venom can end lives, the snakes themselves are also part of the natural order, reminders of the delicate balance on which existence rests. To listen is not only to learn about survival from venom, but also survival through the choices we make every day, in matters far smaller than life and death. And if tonight these stories keep you company, let them do so gently, like distant voices on a warm night, soft enough to let your thoughts drift and your eyes close. The memory of that first bite never really leaves those who experience it. Survivors often describe how the moment plays again and again in their minds even years later, the suddenness of it, the sound of grass shifting or the dry hiss of scales, the seconds that seemed too ordinary to carry so much weight, now transformed into the turning point of their lives. They remember the stillness that followed, broken only by the rush of blood in their ears. In the quiet recollection, what lingers most is not simply the pain, but the unsettling realization of how fragile life can be when faced with the ancient power of venom. Each survivor speaks in their own voice, sometimes halting, sometimes steady, yet woven with a thread of gravity that softens into reflection. For one man, his memory begins on a humid afternoon in the fields. He recalls bending low among the plants, the feel of soil warm under his palms, the sound of insects in the distance. He had always noticed the occasional snake in his land, but most of them seemed harmless, scattering away long before his shadow fell across them. On this day, however, the snake did not scatter. It remained still, flattened against the soil until the last possible moment. He stepped backward, unaware, the heel of his foot pressing down on something alive. Before he could process what had happened, the strike came. He remembers freezing, as if time itself wrapped around him like a tightening coil, and for a blink he could not believe it had happened. The pain came later, a pulsing burn that spread with each heartbeat. He thought of his wife waiting at home, of his children running through their small yard, and he knew every action from that moment must be chosen with precision. There was no room for mistake. He admitted that his first instinct was panic. Neighbors rushed to help, voices overlapping, some urging immediate action, others recalling remedies passed down through generations. Someone pressed a cloth tourniquet above the wound, pulling it as tight as possible with trembling hands. Another suggested cutting across the bite to try to let the venom flow out in thin streams of blood. The man, half lost in fear, allowed them to do as they thought best, trusting in desperation more than in knowledge. His voice trembled as he recalled the moment, the sharp blade piercing his skin, the burning sting made worse rather than better, the blood flowing but carrying no visible venom away. He collapsed into dizziness, his body heavy with weakness, and though a quick transport finally delivered him to a modest clinic hours later, the damage had already deepened. He survived, but the wound never fully healed. Even years afterward, he limped across his fields, bearing the visible scar of both fang marks and blade cuts, and an invisible scar of choices wrongly made in terror. For another survivor, the story followed a different path. She too was bitten, her foot struck by a snake as she walked at dusk through the tall grass. But in her case, she remembered the voices of a health worker who had once visited the village, speaking calmly about snakebites and first aid. Those words returned in the chaos of the moment. Instead of panic, she forced herself to remain still. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she told herself, "Do not run, do not move more than necessary, keep the poison slow." She called for help, and family members carried her, carefully, without letting her limbs flail about. A bandage was tied firmly but not cutting off circulation, enough to gently compress the tissue and slow the venom's spread. With quiet urgency, they placed her on a cart and began the long push toward the nearest health center. She remembers hearing her own soft groans, colder than the night air, but she also remembers the steady presence of a neighbor who placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Stay with us, just breathe slowly." Hours later, she received antivenom. The fear subsided slowly, like darkness giving way to dawn, and she survived without lasting damage. Her story stands as an echo of how knowledge and presence of mind can become lifelines in the most fragile moments. These accounts show not only the unpredictability of encounters with venomous snakes but also highlight the sharp contrast between wrong and right decisions. One step taken in blind tradition can magnify danger, one breath taken in steady awareness can preserve life. All who have lived through such ordeals describe how these memories shape them afterward. Some live with permanent scars, numbness, or limited movement in hands or legs. Others carry phantoms in their sleep, dreams of coils tightening, dreams of unseen strikes haunting them in silence. Yet despite the weight of such memories, there is often gratitude as well, gratitude that life, though shaken and changed, continues. In the long landscape of midnight storytelling, their voices weave into something larger. They remind us that snakebites are not singular or isolated but part of a wide and often unrecognized reality across continents. From rural Asia to the savannas of Africa, from the deep forests of Latin America to the deserts of Australia, the stories repeat in different accents and languages, but they carry the same pulse: sudden bite, desperate decision, fragile survival. Listening across these stories is like hearing a chorus carried by the wind, each voice adding its own echoes of fear and triumph, wrong turns, and narrow escapes. One elder in a village spoke of his memories from decades past, when transportation was almost non-existent, and medicine scarce. He remembered his brother being bitten during the harvest season. They carried him on a crude bamboo stretcher, walking for hours under sun and moon. But by the time they reached help, the venom had already stolen breath from his lungs. The elder's voice grew quiet as he told this, his eyes distant, as if reliving the trek step by step, dust rising from their feet, the silence among the group louder than any words. He survived long enough to relay the story now, reminding younger generations that time is sometimes the most decisive element in life and death. Later, when he himself was bitten many years afterward, he managed to survive because he was taken swiftly on a motorbike, rushed to a rural health post that had stored antivenom. For him, the contrast of his brother's death and his own healing became a lesson written permanently into his heart. Each survivor offers something beyond the facts of medicine. They offer the noise of crickets in the grass when they fell, the sight of relatives rushing barefoot toward them, the taste of fear in the back of their throat, the way the air seemed thin as they struggled for control. They are the carriers of the emotional texture of a snakebite, reminding us not that nature is cruel, but that it is unrelenting in its cycles of danger and chance. They remind us that survival does not exist only in hospitals, but in choices long before doors of clinics appear. Often, after survival, there comes silence. Weeks or months afterward, as the pain lessens and the body heals, survivors speak of feeling suspended between life and memory. Some cannot step into tall grass without feeling a chill run up their spine. Some hesitate to walk at night, every shadow suddenly alive with potential threat. And yet others choose differently. Some become teachers of prevention, carrying forward their stories as warnings and guides. They speak in almost ritual tones, urging neighbors to learn, to remember, to act with calmness, so that no one else must endure the mistakes they endured. Even in hospitals, the stories leave echoes. Doctors and nurses describe the arrivals of snakebite victims, the urgency in their steps, the frantic voices of families surrounding beds. They recall the swelling limbs carried on stretchers, the faintness in eyes clouded with venom. Yet they also speak of relief, when treatment restores breath, when shaking ceases and the pulse evens out. The antivenom becomes not only medication but almost a miracle in those hours, though the true miracle is often the journey of the people who manage to arrive in time. The quiet gratitude in the eyes of survivors as they leave hospital stays with health workers, feeding their efforts to continue despite limited supplies, despite rural isolation, despite the continuing waves of emergencies. As we listen to these lives unfolding, the thread tying them together is both heavy and fragile, the thread of decision. Wrong and right, panic and calm, ignorance and knowledge, run through every story like currents under the surface of water. Each detail has weight. Whether to tie a cloth tightly or loosely, whether to move swiftly or stay still, whether to cut or not to cut, each choice adds a stone to the invisible scales that decide fate. This is the heart of their survival, moments where seconds can make eternity, where instinct either saves or endangers. And in that recognition, there is something humanly universal, for all lives are filled with small and large choices, unrecognized doors that open and close, shaping where we go, who we become, and whether the next dawn greets us at all. The survivors, when asked what saved them most, often do not speak merely of medicine. They speak of hands that carried them, of loved ones who refused to let them be left alone, of neighbors who ran miles on dirt roads to seek transport. The human bonds, tender even in the midst of terror, shine through each account. It is as if the venom met not only the strength of science but also the strength of connection, and in the balance of those forces, life tilted toward survival. Those bonds, perhaps, are more lasting even than the scars left on skin. Strangely, many describe that when they recovered, they felt life had changed meaning. The fragility revealed by venom made each ordinary moment more precious. A breeze at dawn, a meal surrounded by family, the laughter of children, the feel of earth underfoot all seemed sharper, more vivid, as if survival had awakened them to life's delicate beauty. They had walked near the edge of silence, and returning, they carried a new softness in their voices, a new reverence for the hours given to them. For listeners, their words can also remind us, gently, of how each moment holds more than we tend to notice. Through all of this, the stories remain calm now, softened into memory, drawn out during conversations under trees, shared across teacups or in the quiet corners of houses. The survivors no longer tremble as they did on those nights but tell their stories with a steady tone, their speech flowing like slow river water. As we hear them in this tapestry of narrative, perhaps our own pulse grows calmer too, the weight of their journeys easing us into quieter awareness of our own. Their struggles, though fierce, are remembered here without rush, in gentle cadence, so their lessons may linger not as fear, but as flowing reflection to accompany rest. And so the night continues, carrying these voices across distance and time, weaving them into the quiet listening space where you now rest. In these words, there is no sudden strike, but rather the long echo afterward, the echo of survival told and retold, so that once more, danger is transformed into memory, and memory into gentle guidance. It is here, in the slow turning of voices, that the stories truly live, inviting your thoughts to soften and drift, as the tide of narrative carries on. The voices of survivors continue to weave through time like threads in an endless tapestry. Each begins with a bite, but none of them end in the same way. What returns again and again in their accounts is the strange contrast between the suddenness of danger and the slowness of human response. To be bitten is instant, a flash of movement so fast it feels less like an act of nature and more like lightning tearing through the fabric of ordinary life. But to react is slower, filled with hesitation, filled with decisions that unfold under a weight of panic. In that fragile gap between the split-second strike and the hesitant choices that follow, the fate of life and death is decided. One young man described the moment he realized he had only a handful of minutes to act. He was walking along a narrow dirt path, the kind worn down by years of bare feet and cattle hooves, when something sharp pricked his calf. At first, he thought it was only a thorn, but then he noticed the small twin marks, and his heart seemed to stop. He remembered his body trembling not because of pain, but because of knowing. His friends nearby shouted wildly, some urging him to run to town, others telling him to lie still. In the chaos, the young man chose the wrong path. He bolted forward, sprinting with fear across the path, every stride pumping venom faster through his veins. His legs ached within minutes, his chest tightened, his breathing grew shallow. By the time they carried him into help, he could no longer stand. He survived, but only after weeks in a hospital bed, learning the hard price of one mistaken choice. Contrast that with a story told softly by a mother who remembered the bite that nearly killed her child. Her son, no older than 10, had been playing in the grass at the edge of their yard when he cried out suddenly. She ran toward him, seeing the faint marks on his ankle and the swelling already beginning. Neighbors hurried closer, their voices rushing into a storm of suggestions, but her voice rose above them all. She remembered the training she had been given by a local clinic worker: do not run, do not panic, and keep the bite immobile. She carried her child, whispering calm words even though her own heart was aflame with terror. She sent someone on a motorbike ahead to alert the nearest health post. Hours later, as antivenom coursed into her child's veins, she finally allowed herself to cry, her tears flowing over his still face as she realized he would live. Her story carried none of the desperation of mistakes, only the quiet weight of having chosen correctly in the brief span that truly mattered. Listening to survivors describe these moments, the lesson becomes clear: the difference between right and wrong first aid is not measured in textbooks alone, but in the faces of those who live or never return. The wrong choices, passed on through rumor, tradition, or desperation, are etched deeply into memories, leaving scars on bodies and scars on families. The right choices, though simple, mark themselves as miracles remembered forever. There was another man who remembered vividly how his village believed strongly in cutting the skin after a bite, an act thought to allow the poison to bleed away. When he was struck by a viper in the forest, that old knowledge rushed to the forefront. Friends pressed a knife into his hand, urging him to cut into the wound. But somewhere deep in his memory he remembered hearing that such methods were harmful. In agony, he resisted their pressure. He clutched the wound to his chest and demanded instead that they help him stay still and carry him gently out of the forest. Hours later, weak but still alive, he arrived at a hospital where doctors confirmed that had he followed tradition, he might not have lived. His refusal to give in to fear became his survival, and he now tells his story to younger villagers, warning them against doing as their ancestors once did. The common thread here is not only venom, but the human struggle with knowledge itself. In every village, every family, There are voices that echo older times, urging methods rooted in fear rather than science. And there are also voices faint but steady, urging calmness, urging patience, urging modern awareness. Survivors remember this struggle as clearly as the bite itself. They recall arguments among family members, the pull between action that feels heroic but causes harm, and action that feels passive but saves life. This tension reveals not only the venom in their veins, but the venom of doubt in human nature. Citizens of rural regions often speak of the helplessness they felt after the bite. Time stretches painfully when every second could mean the spread of poison. One survivor described the heaviness in his chest as he was carried on a motorbike, the world rushing past him in a blur of gravel and green. He remembered the bumps in the road jarring his swollen leg, the wind against his face, the thought repeating in his head that perhaps he would never see his family again. Those long minutes on the road, though only 30 by the clock, seemed longer than any years of his life before. And yet, pressed into the seat of that motorbike, he somehow felt the strength of those who carried him. Each vibration in the metal was a signal of how much they wanted him to live. The venom beat within him, but so too did the unspoken determination of the community around him. In voices softened with time, some survivors admit that even after healing, something within them never returned to how it was. There is a lingering sense of fragility, a sense that safety can never be taken for granted again. One woman recalled that after her recovery, she no longer walked barefoot outdoors. Another man, though grown and strong, admitted that he always checked every corner of his home before stepping inside. Children who lived through bites often carried with them into adulthood dreams of striking fangs and piercing eyes. Even after wounds close and pulses steady, the experience leaves its shadow. Yet shadows do not only tighten into fear. They also soften into new forms of gratitude. Survivors speak constantly of the ordinary miracles of life, the ability to breathe freely, to laugh without pain, to stand in sunlight without weakness in their limbs. One farmer, who lost nearly a year of work recovering the use of his leg, described how simple it felt to plant seeds in the soil again. The act was small, the return to his field quiet, but it felt as though he had regained the universe. Survivors laugh, tell jokes, and embrace their families with renewed vigor, for once you have brushed against death, the simple beat of life carries a rhythm deeper than any music. The stories continue not in grand declarations but in steady voices. In one village, elders gather to speak of the times when snakebites claimed lives simply because modern medicine had not arrived soon enough. They remember funerals by candlelight, the sound of wailing spread across the fields. But now they notice change, access to motorbikes, expansion of rural clinics, arrival of antivenom. Though the danger of the snake is eternal, the chance of survival has grown stronger. Their voices reflect not only memory of fear but also hope that their children and grandchildren might face fewer such losses. Health workers, many of them uncelebrated, also share their accounts of what it means to stand between venom and survival. A nurse recalls the number of times she sat quietly by the bedside of a patient, watching for slight improvements or sudden declines. She remembers the weight of parents clenching their hands, waiting for any sign that their child's chest would rise steadily again. In her voice, exhaustion is clear, but so too is resilience. For those who work against the poison, every success story is fuel to continue in a fight that is sometimes unseen by the wider world. It is impossible to ignore the global scale of snakebites, though statistics can feel cold compared to lived accounts. Yet each survivor becomes a living statistic transformed into flesh, reminding us that the numbers represent pain and choice, fear and healing. The world holds thousands of such voices waiting to be heard. Each one tells us that the border between survival and tragedy is crossed by human decisions, human support, and the availability of medicine, a crossroad that is different depending on where in the world the bite occurs. Listening to these stories late into the night, one discovers a certain rhythm. The rhythm is not rapid, it does not race, it flows like quiet breathing, steady and calm. Once the danger has passed, the survivors tell their stories with patience, as though each word is chosen carefully, without need for haste. This rhythm, repeated again and again, has the power to lull even restless minds into calm reflection. In their sharing, there is comfort. In their pause, there is peace. And in their survival, there is the reminder that even in the darkest struggles, life continues to seek its way toward the light. Imagine now the survivor's hearth, where words are spoken under the glow of a single lamp. Family members listen, nodding with solemn faces, hearing again the story they have already heard many times but still receive with fresh concern. For in this repeated telling, wisdom is passed down slowly, like water smoothing stone. The lessons of Snakebite are not only about how to react to venom. They are about patience, about breath, about paying attention to the choices made at the turning points of our lives. They are about trust in those around us, faith in the calm voice among the storm, belief in our ability to survive. As this long night's reflection extends, the air itself seems to carry the murmur of their stories, weightless with the passage of time yet heavy with meaning. Survivor after survivor speaks of the moment when everything could have ended, and instead life continued. That continuation, gentle and fragile, is what ties their voices together. And in listening, we ourselves continue forward, eased into quietness, into the soft awareness of breath, into peaceful rest carried on the current of their words. Fear runs deep in the silence after a bite. Survivors often describe not only the sting of fangs, but the strange quiet that follows, as though the world withdraws its everyday sounds for a moment to emphasize the magnitude of what has just occurred. In those seconds, the air feels heavy, and even the smallest noises, a bird stirring in the distance, the shuffle of leaves, the rush of breath, seem magnified against the mind's repeating thought, what has just happened to me? It is the recognition that something unseen is moving inside the body, a power both ancient and indifferent, spreading its influence along invisible paths beneath the skin. In that silence, decisions take root, sometimes guided by fear, sometimes by clarity, always carrying weight beyond their appearance. One survivor, a young farmer from the edge of a small village, remembered the moment with remarkable clarity. He had been cutting grass for livestock when he felt the sudden strike on his hand. At first, he hoped it was a thorn, a sting, an insect, anything but what it truly was. But as he looked down and saw the faint trailing tail slide away into the brush, denial gave way to panic. Neighbors nearby rushed to his aid, their voices rising sharply into the evening air. One shouted that he must tie his arm tightly, another demanded that the poison be sucked from the wound. In the chaos, tradition overwhelmed reason. Within minutes, a cord was pulled so tight above his elbow that his fingers turned pale, while a relative bent over to place lips against the wound, spitting blood in desperate motions. The farmer collapsed into weakness, dizzy, and later remembered little of the hours that followed. By the time he reached a clinic, infection had already worsened the wound and weeks of treatment were required. Though he survived, his hand never recovered its full strength. He tells his story now with sorrow, repeating again and again that what harmed him most was not solely the venom itself, but the wrong methods trusted in the storm of panic. In contrast stands the experience of a woman bitten near the threshold of her own home. She spoke in quiet tones of her children playing as she stepped out, bare feet against the old wooden boards. A sharp pain lanced through her foot, and she looked down to see the brief twisting of a snake disappearing beneath the planks. Her children screamed, her heart froze, but she recalled the guidance of a training meeting once attended by chance. She steadied her breath, told her children not to panic, and asked her son to fetch cloth strips. She kept still, refusing all urges to pace or run or shake her foot. Within half an hour, neighbors carried her gently to a passing truck, which took her toward the district hospital. She still recalls lying on the bed, the hiss of oxygen beside her, the chill of the antivenom sliding into her veins. Moments blurred, but hours later she opened her eyes to see her children at her side, relief softening their faces. She insists that knowledge saved her life. The few calm instructions remembered, obeyed against the tide of fear and myth. These two stories, echoing one another across distance and time, reveal the fragile balance between harm and healing. Wrong first aid, though done with love, becomes a knife cutting deeper wounds. Right first aid, though sometimes quiet and seemingly passive, carries the weight of salvation. Survivors who tell of mistakes often speak with regret, while those who speak of correct decisions do so with gratitude, as if touched by grace. Sometimes the wrong choice is not in the actions taken, but in the time lost. A man from a distant village recounted how his family delayed seeking medical help, convinced by neighbors that the local healer would provide remedies strong enough to counteract venom. They waited while herbs were ground, chants recited, rituals performed. He lay in a corner of his home, sweat soaking his clothes, muscles tightening, lips dry. By the time they finally agreed to transport him, precious hours had passed. He recalls fainting along the way, his vision darkening as though taken by shadows. Arrival at the hospital was almost too late, and though doctors worked tirelessly to save him, his body bore permanent weakness afterward. He lived, but lived partially able to walk, but never again as before. His story carries a note of sorrow not for himself alone, but for all the others who still walk the dangerous line between tradition and science, uncertain of where to place their trust in the spinning clock of survival. Another survivor remembers the outcome when the right decision was made swiftly. He had been gathering firewood when bitten, the sharp strike on his ankle bringing a cry he did not recognize as his own. His brother, nearby, resisted panic. Though his heart raced, he remembered advice given by health workers: immobilize, bandage, carry, and seek help without delay. They followed that exact course, refusing offers of untested remedies. Hours later, as antivenom coursed through his veins, the man thought of his brother's steady calm and realized that his life had been preserved not only by the vial of medicine, but by the choice not to waste time. He speaks of it now with quiet reverence, telling audiences that survival, in the end, is often about refusing to surrender to fear's temptation. The patterns repeat across regions, across ages, across voices. Wrong first aid lives on in shadows of culture, lingering from times when medicine was distant or absent. People cut into flesh, trying to force venom out. They burn the skin, believing heat could kill the poison. They bind limbs so tightly that circulation ceases and tissue dies. Each method, born of desperation, promises relief but invites harm. The survivors who lived through them tell of scars deeper than teeth, scars carved by knives and fire and cords. They tell too of the bitter knowledge afterward, the realization that pain came not only from nature, but from human error. Their voices are both warnings and laments. And yet, among the stories, the right method shines steadily. Calmness, immobilization, pressure bandages, swift journey to trained care. Survivors repeat these steps in their retellings as though casting spells of protection for the next listener. They want others to know, to remember, to act differently than those before. In their voices, the right decisions are sacred and knowledge hard-earned by those who nearly lost everything. The doctors and nurses who receive victims also speak of this divide. They recall the arrivals of patients who had been treated poorly at home, whose limbs were swollen beyond recognition, whose infections complicated recovery. They speak of those who came swiftly, bandaged correctly, bodies weakened but still strong enough for antivenom to work smoothly. The difference, they insist, is profound. They remind us that while antivenom is the cure for venom, knowledge is the bridge that carries a body from bite to treatment. Without that bridge, the cure may come too late. After survival, memories shift slowly from terror into reflection. Survivors who made wrong choices often dedicate their later lives to warning others against repeating such errors. They speak in schools, at community gatherings, under trees where villagers rest. Their scars become teaching tools, their voices steady and insistent. Those who made right choices speak as well, though with gentler tones, encouraging calmness against the tide of panic. Both groups, those scarred by mistakes and those preserved by knowledge, become teachers, carrying the collective wisdom of near death into the future. Beyond wounds and lessons, the survivors carry something harder to define. They carry the weight of time itself, of having walked the edge between breath and silence. They describe the suspended moments when breath became difficult, when vision blurred, when voices of family sounded faint and far away. They carry memories of the hospital bed, the cold sting of needles, the quiet reassurances of nurses in the long hours of night. They remember the trembling relief when told they would live, the faces of loved ones brightening like dawn. These experiences do not fade, they imprint new understanding of what it means to simply exist. And so, as we listen long into these narratives, one truth settles like dust on still air: survival is not chance alone. It is not only the random roll of fate in a world where venomous creatures share our paths. It is choice, it is action, it is the voices of those who guide us in moments when fear could overwhelm. Wrong methods deepen wounds. Right methods save lives. Survivors embody both. Their voices speak not for themselves alone, but for all who may one day face the sudden strike in the darkness. As the night extends and stories flow, the rhythm of their voices becomes part of our own breathing, steady and calm. What was once danger transforms into reflection, what was once terror transforms into wisdom, and in that transformation we, too, find rest. The stories carry us gently forward, like a quiet river moving under stars, reminding us that human life is fragile, yet full of resilience, guided always by the choices we make in moments that matter. The night grows deeper as the voices of the survivors continue, weaving together a chorus of experiences that carry with them both sorrow and hope. By now, their stories have begun to converge into a pattern, like ripples circling outward across still water. Each bite is unique, each reaction shaped by circumstance, yet together they reveal the same sense of vulnerability, the same fragile boundary that separates life from loss. When listened to slowly, gently, these stories cease to be only reports of pain. They become meditations on existence itself, on chance, on the choices of humans in moments when every heartbeat carries greater weight than ever before. For some survivors, the memory begins almost like a dream, blurred by fear. A man remembers walking down a quiet trail at sunset, his arms laden with bundles of firewood. He stepped onto cool soil shaded by trees when he felt the strike. His mind stuttered between disbelief and shock, his first instinct to drop his bundle and cry out for help. Villagers came running, their expressions changing from curiosity to fear the moment they saw the marks blooming on his leg. Voices overlapped around him, some repeating the traditions of the past, others arguing against them. He remembers staring into the sky above, watching the branches sway, unable to move but unable to stop the panic of those around him. It was not only the venom that poisoned his body, but the uncertain chorus of advice, each suggestion pulling him in a different direction. Elsewhere, a young boy recounted, many years later, how his family had no means of transport when he was bitten. He lay silently on a wooden mat in the center of his home. His father paced the room, his mother wept softly. Neighbors came to light lamps and offer prayers. Some suggested folk cures passed down through generations, powders, herbs, chants meant to drive away the spirit of the snake. Hours slipped by as rituals were performed around him, while inside his chest the venom was carving its slow progress. His breaths grew shallow, his eyes heavy. By the time someone finally convinced the family to make the journey to the hospital, precious time was gone. He did survive, but when he tells the story now, there is always a pause when he recalls those hours of waiting. He calls it the longest night, not because of the pain, but because of the helplessness in knowing that his survival was being weighed against hesitation. There is often helplessness in these stories, but there is also light. One woman remembered being bitten during a rainy season while returning from the river with jars of water balanced against her hips. The mud was slippery, her sandals worn thin. She slipped, catching herself against the ground, and then felt the hot sting of fangs pressed against her ankle. She screamed, and others rushed to her side. Unlike so many others, however, she had received clear instructions from a traveling health worker only weeks before. She refused to let neighbors cut the wound. She demanded that they carry her rather than let her walk. She repeated, almost like a prayer, the steady instructions: bandage, do not panic, move with care. Hours later, the hospital lights spread around her as she was lifted onto a stretcher. The treatment worked, and in her smile afterward was not only relief, but the pride of knowing her own insistence had brought her to safety. She speaks now with strong conviction, urging all who listen not to give in to fear, but to cling to knowledge instead. The contrast between delay and urgency, between superstition and science, is repeated constantly in the soft voices of survivors. For the listener, these stories carry no fast pace, only measured rhythm, like footsteps taken carefully through shadowed paths. What becomes clear is not only the danger of the bite, but the danger of wrong choices. The venom in the snake's fangs is one kind of poison, the venom of misinformation is another, more lasting. Yet both can be countered by clarity, by awareness, by the memory of lessons told and retold in quiet circles at night. Survival, then, is not only an act of body but of memory, of preserving the right wisdom and setting aside the misleading echoes of the past. Doctors speak quietly of this divide, too. In small clinics where resources are scarce, they witness the consequences of delay and error. Limbs swollen dramatically, infection spreading where knives have cut, blood poisoned not only by venom but by the actions meant to heal. Yet they also witness the bodies that arrive swiftly, stabilized by calm decisions made on dirt paths, carried carefully by family who resisted panic. These patients, though trembling with weakness, are often restored more quickly. Antivenom has its best chance against calm minds as well as swift travel. For the doctors, the line between right and wrong often unfolds before their eyes in living form, and their memories hold dozens of examples of both fates. In their stories, one hears not only science, but sorrow for losses that may have been prevented, and joy for lives preserved by even the simplest of correct choices. Among the survivors are also those who did not emerge wholly intact. A man spoke of his bitten leg with eyes heavy from years of bearing its scar. Though he lived, his leg was never the same. The muscles weakened, infection had left its mark, and he could not walk the way he once had. In his voice, however, is little bitterness, there is only the calm acceptance carved by time. He can no longer work the long days in fields, so he tells stories to grandchildren instead. He urges them to avoid what he suffered, to carry shoes on their feet, to never step blindly into tall grass. His role has shifted from laborer to teacher. In his wisdom, there is resilience, for survival is not always to return unchanged, it is sometimes to live differently, carrying lessons into the next generation. Some describe the dreams they carried after recovery. Nightmares of unseen coils wrapping around their legs, of sudden pain erupting without warning, of venom flowing like shadow through their bodies. They would wake with pounding hearts, sweat clinging to their skin, only to remember that they were still alive, that the danger had passed. These dreams softened over time, becoming less like panic and more like distant memories. Many describe that telling their story again and again slowly lessened the weight of fear. To speak is to heal. To release words into the open air is to release the grip of silence. Their stories, then, are more than survival, they are medicine for the mind, treatment not found in hospitals but in shared human voices. Children who survived bites remember their parents' faces most vividly. Some recall the tight grip of their mother's hand as they were rushed through fields. Others recall the tears of fathers who often hid emotions but could not hide them on that day. These memories linger as reminders not only of danger but of love. Snakebite survivors often speak of how their ordeal revealed the depth of bonds around them. In moments when time seemed to dissolve, they found family and neighbors holding them together, refusing to let go. Venom coursed through the veins, but courage coursed around them in equal measure, creating a circle of strength that carried them forward. And through all the stories, one truth emerges slowly and without haste: survival is not given freely, it is chosen step by step. Each action taken matters deeply. Choices as simple as whether to move or remain still become as vast as destiny itself. Wrong actions close doors. Right actions open them. In the end, the survivors are living proof that the thin line between death and life is drawn not only by snakes, but by humans themselves, who must decide how to walk it. As the voices drift on into the long night, they remind us again of fragility and resilience. They do not rush. They do not scream. Their tone has settled into patience, into wisdom earned by suffering. Listening to them is like listening to the slow rhythm of water against rocks, flowing endlessly yet never hurried. And in their rhythm, we too are guided into calm reflection. Their choices, their mistakes, their triumphs, their scars all are laid before us so that we may learn. And as we listen quietly, the lessons settle deeper than knowledge, they become part of the very breath with which we drift further into rest. In the long corridors of recovery, survivors often find themselves caught between silence and memory. The venom may pass, the swelling may fade, but the echoes of the experience remain, whispering through the body like shadows that refuse to leave even when the light has returned. Some describe the sensation of reliving their ordeal, not always as nightmares, but as sharp flashes of memory that appear without warning. The hospital bed, the smell of antiseptic, the urgent voices of nurses, they linger long after departure from the ward. These memories take root in the body, teaching survivors that healing is never instant, that to survive a snakebite is to begin a slow and patient journey back toward balance. A young woman remembered this imbalance as something deeply felt in her mind as well as her veins. She had been bitten while collecting firewood at the edge of the forest, the fangs of a pit viper piercing her lower leg. Though she received medical treatment in time, she found that weeks later her muscles remained stiff, her steps uneven. Yet what weighed heaviest was not the limp, but the way her thoughts circled endlessly around the bite. She could not walk into shade without imagining scales hidden beneath leaves. She could not step barefoot without feeling phantoms of pain. Her recovery was twofold: rebuilding strength in her body and reshaping trust in the world around her. Over years, she found that gentleness toward herself was as important as medicine, that each moment of quiet reflection slowly rewove the threads of her life. Others describe their journey of healing as layered with gratitude as much as with fear. A farmer who survived multiple surgeries following a cobra bite recalled the moment when sensation finally returned to his fingers. They had been numb for weeks, stiff like wood despite every effort of doctors, and he feared he would never again feel the soil he had worked since childhood. Then, one morning, as sunlight streamed through the window, he touched the edge of his blanket and felt the faintest tingle. He wept, unashamed, holding his hand to his chest and whispering prayers of thanks. For him, survival had transformed every sensation: the softness of fabric, the warmth of sunlight, the voices of his children into treasures he could never overlook again. Doctors who aid recovery share the quiet battles of these longer healing stages. One physician working in a rural hospital explained that venom is not only a threat in the first hours, but often leaves lingering marks on nerves, muscles, and kidneys. He sees patients return weekly for months, some for years, learning how to walk again, learning how to manage weakness. The effort is endless, but so is resilience. He speaks with admiration of the determination found in these patients: farmers who strap tools to weakened hands to continue working, mothers who carry water while limping on half-healed legs, children who return to play though their bodies tire more quickly than before. In his eyes, survival is measured not only in those first critical hours, but in the long patience afterward, a patience that stretches like a road through every part of life. The stories of survivors often widen into stories of their families, for no one faces venom alone. A mother remembers the day her teenage son was bitten. She describes sitting beside his hospital bed for an entire week, refusing to close her eyes except in moments of complete exhaustion. Each sigh of his breath, each twitch of his body, was etched into her memory. She became so tuned to his rhythms that she could sense changes before the machines did, waking nurses when she felt danger rising. She insists that her vigilance was an unseen thread of his survival, even when medicine was doing what it could. Mothers, fathers, siblings, neighbors all become part of the story of survival, their roles drawn not in textbooks but in love written across sleepless nights. Survivors recall these faces as clearly as they recall the snakes themselves. The hospitals, too, leave lasting impressions. Survivors speak of the smells, the buzzing lights, the narrow beds, the thin curtains separating one patient from the next. For many, it was the first time leaving their village, the first time feeling the cold sting of an IV injection, the first time speaking with doctors in uniforms. Some remember the kindness of nurses who held their hands, who washed their wounds gently, who whispered comfort through the night hours when venom still burned their blood. These memories linger as bright points of hope in otherwise dark experiences. When they speak of their ordeal later, many survivors give equal measure of attention to these human gestures as to the medicine itself, for it was not only antivenom that saved them, but the compassion woven into each act of care. Not all recoveries lead back to full strength, and survivors are open about this truth. One man cannot bend his knee fully anymore, the muscles stiff from damage. Another cannot lift heavy loads, his arm weakened permanently. A woman lost partial vision after neurotoxic venom spread through her body before treatment. These survivors do not speak of defeat, but of adaptation. They reshape lives around limitation, creating resilience where strength was lost. A man unable to farm as he once did began teaching local children, telling stories by the fire as lessons hidden within tales. A woman unable to walk long distances began weaving baskets, her designs praised for their intricate beauty. Survival, in these accounts, is not a return to the past but the forging of a new future. Across regions, similarities become striking. In India, farmers describe the fear of krites and cobras. In Africa, villages recall the strikes of puff adders and mambas. In Southeast Asia, vipers and cobras thread through daily memory. Though the species differ, the survivor stories echo one another with uncanny similarity. The sudden strike during ordinary routine, the rush of panic, the choices torn between old tradition and modern knowledge, the urgent journeys by motorbike or truck, the hopeful arrival at a hospital. And afterward, the long path of healing, the gratitude for life even when changed. Listening across continents is like listening to the same story told in different languages, a rhythm of humanity's shared encounter with nature's silent hunters. Among these global voices, one truth becomes undeniable: the importance of spreading knowledge. Survivors often say their deepest wish is for others to learn from their story. They describe themselves not as victims, but as messengers. Some travel with health organizations, speaking at schools and markets. Others simply repeat their warnings at village gatherings. They speak of the wrong methods that almost killed them, of the calm choices that carried them to safety, of the doctors whose efforts gave them back their families. This act of storytelling is itself a continuation of survival, a way of weaving the thread of their life into the tapestry of the community so that no one else need repeat their mistakes. Yet woven into these reflections is always the memory of fear. Survivors almost always describe the moment when they thought they might not live. They recall voices around them fading, breath coming shallow, limbs growing heavy as if sinking into the earth. These moments remain in memory sharper than all others, frozen fragments of mortality. And yet, when they speak of them now, their voices are calm, softened by time and perspective. What once was terror has become wisdom. What once was despair has become gratitude. In their words, fear is transformed into guidance for the listener, a gentle reminder of the thinness of life, a tender call to be present in every moment. Listening to these accounts, one feels a steadying of the mind, a slowing of thoughts. The survivors' voices do not rush, they linger. Their memories stretch like a river across a plain, moving with patience, reflecting light. In their recounting, the frantic pace of panic is rewritten into the calm rhythm of sharing. This rhythm becomes the rhythm of the listener as well, breathing synchronizing with story, heart slowing into comfort. These stories, though born of danger, lull instead of alarm. They transform venom into reflection, panic into peace. In the late hours of the night, these voices become companions to our own solitude. They remind us, without urgency, of how delicate each moment is, how much depends on decisions we often overlook. They remind us that family, neighbors, and strangers form the net that catches us when we fall. They remind us that survival is more than the absence of death, it is the continuation of life in forms sometimes altered but still radiant. As we drift further into their stories, we are carried not toward dread, but toward calm acceptance that we, too, are fragile, and that this fragility is itself profound. And so the survivors speak on, their narratives blending into something larger than themselves. Theirs is not only a story of snakes and venom, but of presence, of human connection, of choices shaping destiny. It is in listening to them that we find both caution and serenity. They offer us not fear, but rhythm. Not terror, but reflection. And as their gentle recounting flows, it becomes part of the air around us, lulling thought into stillness, inviting rest into the body, carrying us softly toward dreams where danger has passed, but the lessons remain, glowing quietly in the silence of night. The voices of those who survived snakebites often return, again and again, to the quiet aftermath, the days and nights when their bodies struggled to mend from the storm that venom had stirred inside them. It is in the long reflections of healing that the depth of their stories truly emerges, because once the pain subsides, the lessons become sharper, and the gratitude grows heavier, like rain clouds preparing to break after weeks of silence. Survivors often describe how they measure their lives differently afterward, no longer in years or months, but in the fragile breaths they thought they might not have. Each remembered detail, each fragment of memory, becomes a thread woven into the wide tapestry of human survival. A father remembers lying on a hospital cot, his leg swollen twice its size, the puncture marks at his ankle throbbing long after the antivenom had been delivered. He describes the way every night he drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by the sound of his children crying at home, wondering if he would live to see them grown. Even as his body endured fevers and chills, he found himself holding tightly to moments of tenderness, the touch of a nurse who patted his wrist, the distant laughter of another patient who had survived, the soft cool air from a window breaking the density of the ward. These details became his anchor. He tells his story now not with tears but with patience, reminding anyone who listens that life is not guaranteed, that it returns only as a gift. One woman, bitten while harvesting rice, spoke quietly about her struggles after medicine saved her life but not the full function of her hand. The venom had damaged tissue, leaving her fingers stiff and weak. She could no longer grip tools as she had before, no longer weave mats with the swiftness she once took pride in. At first, despair pressed heavily upon her heart. She wondered how she could provide, how she could carry her share of work in a household dependent on every hand. But slowly, with the encouragement of her family, she turned to other kinds of work. Her weaving slowed but took on new patterns, more intricate, more patient, her designs soon admired by neighbors. She came to see her survival, and even her limitation, not as loss but transformation. Each basket completed became a symbol of renewal, every altered rhythm of her life evidence that even venom cannot extinguish creativity. Survivors often find themselves becoming teachers after their ordeals. A man once nearly lost his life to the wrong treatments offered by neighbors, but after recovery, he began traveling from village to village with health workers, standing beneath trees to address gathered families. He would show them his scars, lift the pant leg to reveal the swollen, discolored marks, and speak softly of choices made in panic. He urged others to learn, to keep old myths in their stories but not in their actions, to remember that calmness and knowledge save while desperation often harms. His audiences listened in silence, children staring at the dark lines on his leg, elders nodding slowly to themselves. With every retelling, his survival spread outward, multiplying into the choices of countless others. Yet for many, telling the story is not only about guiding others but about healing themselves. Survivors describe how speaking their memories gradually transforms the sharp edges of fear into smoother shapes of understanding. At first, they could barely recount a single detail without trembling, without holding their chests against the rising flood of panic. But in time, each telling was less sharp, more steady, until eventually their stories became nearly meditative. It is this act of speaking, of weaving memory into words, that serves as medicine in its own way. Survivors emerge not only stronger but softer, carrying burdens that are shared rather than sealed. Some survivors carry into later life the remembrance of those who did not make it, friends or family struck by venom whose stories ended before medicine could arrive. These memories color their survival with shades of sorrow. They speak of funerals marked by candlelight, of fields left fallow for weeks, of families torn by grief. Their own survival, by contrast, feels bittersweet. Yet even this duality of grief and gratitude becomes part of the wisdom they pass down. Life is fragile, they remind us, yet in fragility there is strength, for the awareness of uncertainty deepens the sweetness of every day. Doctors who have worked with dozens, even hundreds, of snakebite victims often echo this duality in their own voices. They admit that not every life can be saved, that resources sometimes run short, that patients sometimes arrive too late. These losses weigh on them like shadows. Yet what sustains them are the stories of the ones who live, the father who walks again, the mother who returns to her children, the child who plays once more in the yard. Each saved life becomes a small victory in a larger struggle, a reminder that their work, though exhausting, is sacred. They speak of antivenom not only as medicine, but as possibility, a vial representing the fragile hope carried across vast distances by people determined to preserve life. In the quiet retellings that stretch on into the night, one hears the slow layering of human connection, the way a bite that might have ended in silence instead unfolds into a wide circle of voices keeping memory alive. The survivor's first aid is carried onward into others' preparations. The doctor's efforts ripple into community's awareness. The lessons of sorrow are transformed into the lessons of survival. Nothing is wasted, not even fear, for each element finds its place in the long continuum of how humans endure. Survivors also speak of how the natural world around them changed in their perception after their ordeal. Some admit to fearing the rustle of grass, the glint of scales in the dirt. Yet others describe a strange reverence for the snake itself. They insist that the animal was not malicious but simply defending its space, that the venom was not cruelty but instinct. In their voices, one hears a complicated respect, the recognition that the same creature which nearly ended their life is also part of the balance of nature, a hunter of pests, a figure woven into myths and symbols stretching through thousands of years. Their survival does not lead them to hatred but to awareness of movement through the land, of steps through tall grass, of the shared presence of humans and serpents in the same space. The psychological impact of survival is rarely one of simple relief. It is layered, complex, woven like threads of different colors into a fabric difficult to untangle. Some survivors experience deepened anxieties, others strengthen courage. Some avoid their fields for months, others return the very next day, determined not to surrender. But almost every one of them remembers the bite not as an end, but as a turning point. They speak of how they went on with life, but differently, more cautious, more attentive, more present. These changes may seem small to anyone on the outside, but for the survivors themselves, they are monumental shifts. When a survivor speaks late at night, when their audience sits in stillness, the words roll out with a rhythm almost hypnotic. The strike, the panic, the wrong choice, the right choice, the rush to the hospital, the long weeks after. The cycle is repeated again and again across voices, as though all of humanity shares the same fragile heartbeat. In this rhythm lies the true power of the stories. They connect us beyond borders, beyond cultures, beyond languages. They remind us that in every part of the world, people are joined not only by love and joy but also by fear, by struggle, by the unyielding determination to survive. A man who lived through a snakebite once summed his story in a single sentence: "I am alive because someone knew what to do." His words are simple, nearly too simple for the enormous complexity of what he endured, yet they hold truth. Survival is rarely about the bite itself, it is about what happens in the moments after, about the choices made by those nearby, about the knowledge passed down from one person to the next. He insists that it was not medicine alone that saved him, but connection, the bridge of knowledge carried from a stranger's advice into action that preserved his existence. His story, like so many others, becomes a lesson whispered onward. As the night deepens and the listener drifts further into calm, these voices settle like gentle winds. They are not frantic. They do not demand. They simply exist, flowing steadily, offering fragments of human experience to weave into our own dreaming minds. In them, we hear not only the fear of venom, but the resilience of spirit. We hear not only the mistakes made in panic, but the wisdom that grows slowly out of them. We hear, too, the laughter of those who lived, the gratitude in their tones, the quiet acceptance of life's delicate fragility. And so their stories continue, not in sharp movements, but in smooth currents flowing endlessly forward. To listen is to rest. To absorb is to breathe more slowly. To drift within their words is to know that survival, though uncertain, is always possible, always carried on by voices determined to remember, to share, to live. In the listening, we ourselves become part of that chain, linked softly to those who came before, floating gently along the stream of memory until the silence around us grows still and sleep arrives like dawn after the long night. Across the world, survivors' voices join together, forming echoes that travel across oceans and landscapes, as if the very act of living after venom gives them membership in a silent, enduring brotherhood of endurance. The experiences stretch across continents, tied not by geography but by the same rhythm of sudden strike, spreading poison, decisions made in trembling panic, and the long aftermath of healing both body and mind. Whether spoken in quiet rural dialects in Asia, in soft tones under the starlight of African savannas, in the hushed voices along South American rivers, or in scattered settlements of Australia's vast bushland, their words feel strikingly similar, as though life itself tells the same story again and again through different mouths. A farmer in West Africa remembers the dry heat of his village, the sun pressing down at midday, when he stepped barefoot onto dust and felt the hot stab of fangs just above his ankle. His neighbors panicked, suggesting charms and ashes and desperate measures drawn from generations of habit. But fortune placed in his path an elder man who had once heard instructions from health workers. That elder's calm voice silenced the argument, urging them to bind the wound only gently and carry the farmer carefully toward the nearest clinic. The farmer remembers lying on a wooden cart pulled through dust, staring up into the skies until the clouds blurred. Hours later, he survived because someone remembered the right words at the right time. He tells his story not with anger at the snake, but with reverence for the elder who saved him by refusing panic. In India, a young school teacher recalls being bitten by a kite while she prepared for sleep. The venom worked quickly, tightening her chest, taking her breath. Neighbors urged delay, whispering that traditional rituals would draw out the poison. But her family, determined to resist hesitation, rushed her by motorbike to a hospital many kilometers away. She fainted twice along the ride, jolted awake by the vibrations of the road. The smell of petrol, the hot wind against her face, the sound of her brother shouting above the engine, all remain in her memories as symbols of her journey between life and death. She awoke later in a hospital bed, her body weak but still alive, saved by rapid movement and refusal to surrender to myths. She now teaches her students not only lessons of mathematics and history but the wisdom of survival, reminding them that calm action can mean the difference between return and farewell. In Latin America, along the edges of the rainforest, an elder speaks of the fer-de-lance, a snake feared deeply in his community. He recalls his childhood memory of a neighbor who was bitten, where the family chose ritual over science, and the life slipped away before dawn. Decades later, when he himself was bitten near a riverbank, he demanded quick action. Though weak, he told his companions with all the authority of his voice to carry him quickly to distant medical care. He survived where his friend had not. He tells this story now as both warning and tribute, reminding the young that nature's dangers respect neither pride nor tradition. We survive only when we respond with clarity. In Australia, where venomous snakes move silently across fields and gardens, survivors bring a slightly different tone. One man, bitten by a brown snake while repairing a fence, called immediately for emergency assistance. He followed instructions over the phone, applying a pressure immobilization bandage, keeping still until professionals arrived. His survival, almost seamless, represents the power of awareness combined with access to swift intervention. He still retells it, however, because he knows that without those instructions and without that bandage, his story could have ended before sunset. His account stands with others, not as a tale of panic and myth, but as one shaped by preparedness and immediate guidance, proving that knowledge transforms what might have been doom into little more than a hard memory. The global thread tying all these voices together is not venom itself, it is decision. Decision shaped by memory, shaped by culture, by training, by instinct. Survival depends as much on whether a person runs toward old superstitions or toward modern care, as it does on the type of snake or potency of venom. Survivors know this truth intimately, it is why they repeat their stories endlessly. They are not merely recounting pain, they are transmitting inherited lessons of life and death. To ignore them is to risk repeating their mistakes. To listen is to ensure that wisdom spreads wider than danger ever could. health workers across the world echo similar laments and hopes. A doctor in India speaks of seasonal waves of snakebites, when patients arrive in crowded rooms, swelling with bites sustained during harvesting. He describes how antivenom saves some, how delay condemns others. His voice is weary, but carries hope. In Africa, a nurse speaks of riding motorbikes herself, traveling to villages with small supplies of medicine and larger supplies of words urging locals to favor calm, to avoid dangerous practices, to come quickly for care. In Southeast Asia, emergency workers describe carrying patients through rivers and across mountains, knowing that every minute saved may mean breath restored. These voices too are part of the survivor story, for without caretakers, medicine cannot reach the poisoned veins, and without educators, knowledge cannot chase away the shadows of fear. It is sometimes said that snakebite is a disease of the poor, not because snakes themselves choose victims, but because poverty governs response. Survivors from wealthier areas often describe swift treatment, quick ambulance arrivals, clean hospital beds, efficient care. Survivors in remote or impoverished settings describe hours on footpaths, arguments over folk remedies, lack of medicine even when hospitals are reached. Their lives hang more precariously, their stories filled with greater loss. And yet, their resilience is profound. Listening to them, one hears not bitterness, but determination to spread the word so that others may be spared where they nearly fell. Their survival is not just personal but communal, a shield raised for all who may face danger next. Amid all these accounts, the snake itself emerges not only as a symbol of danger but paradoxically as a symbol of teaching. Some survivors speak of hating snakes, of fearing every shifting leaf. But many describe a strange respect. They see the snake as defender of its space, as a reminder of caution in the natural world. In Africa, elders tell children that the snake teaches humans humility, that no matter how strong, a single misstep can bring one low. In Asia, snakes have been revered as symbols of both death and rebirth, gods and demons woven into legend. Survivors embody this paradox in their stories. Bitten by death, they emerge into rebirth of awareness, carrying forward lessons older than themselves. Their reflections often end not in darkness, but in quiet gratitude. A woman in South America, her arm scarred from a viper, smiles as she describes her grandchildren playing in the yard. A farmer in India, limping from damage left by venom, still sings softly at night, grateful that his voice remains. A young man in Africa, bearing scars across his calf, thanks not fate alone but the steady voice of someone who reminded him not to run. All of them, in their quiet tones, give weight to the truth that survival cannot be measured only in medicine but must also be measured in memory, in family, in the continuation of life's ordinary miracles. Listening to this global chorus is like listening to waves reaching the shore again and again. Each single story may seem small, but together they create a tide strong enough to carry forward wisdom for generations. Their cadence is not fast. It does not demand drama. It flows steadily, gently, like breath itself. And in its flowing, those who listen in the silence of night find themselves sinking deeper towards stillness, wrapped in the realization that within every life, danger and resilience walk hand in hand, and that survival is often simply the result of a choice made calmly in the midst of chaos. As the hours slip on, the air seems filled with all these voices: farmers, parents, children, doctors, nurses, each adding their own thread. The narrative becomes not only about venom, but about community, about courage, about the fragility we all share. Their stories, softened by time, have transformed from terror into teaching, from pain into peace. And so they continue, speaking softly into the dark, guiding us further into reflection, carrying us gently closer to rest, until the boundary between their voices and our dreams dissolves into one. The story of survival does not end simply with the bite, or the frantic choice, or the breathless rush to care. Beyond these moments lies another layer, one where science and human effort intertwine with fragile life. Hospitals, clinics, research laboratories, and the hands of countless professionals all converge upon the story that begins with a single strike. And survivors, when they speak of this part of their journey, describe it not in dramatic tones but with reverence, with quiet awe for the medicines and the people who work to place them within reach. One survivor remembered the face of the doctor who entered her hospital room after she had been carried miles across unforgiving roads. She was barely conscious, drifting in and out of awareness, yet she remembered the calm in his expression, the way his voice smoothed even her terror. He explained the process of antivenom, though she barely comprehended his words at the time. What she did comprehend was his steadiness, his refusal to mirror panic. She felt life tethering to her again in that steadiness, as though the venom inside her veins had finally met a force greater than itself, the human commitment not to let fear dictate the outcome. Doctors in rural hospitals often describe these encounters as battles fought with fragile weapons. Antivenom vials, sometimes scarce, are stored with extreme care, each one precious as gold. Some patients arrive too late, and the medicine cannot reverse what has already passed. Others arrive just in time, and the transformation is extraordinary. They speak of eyes that brighten after hours of dullness, of breaths that strengthen when they had thinned to almost nothing. In these moments, the hospital room becomes a place where the ordinary laws of despair bend to the extraordinary resilience of the human body supported by science. Survivors remember this as though waking from a drowning dream, weak but present, pulled back into life. Beyond hospitals, the story stretches further into science itself. Researchers who dedicate their lives to studying venom describe a landscape both fascinating and urgent. Venom is not a single substance but a complex orchestration of proteins, each one with its own purpose, its own power to disable, to weaken, to destroy. To counteract it requires painstaking study, trial, and generations of effort. Survivors who later learn of this science often feel humbled, realizing their lives were saved not only by the people they met in clinics, but by countless unseen faces in laboratories across decades who worked to understand venom and forge antidotes. Their survival, they say, is a thread woven of community and science braided together. For many survivors, the word antivenom carries a weight almost spiritual. They describe watching the clear liquid drip steadily into their veins, line by line, drop by drop, feeling not immediate relief but sensing that hope had finally entered their bodies along with it. Some describe it as cold at first, the chill of medicine sliding through their arm. Others describe warmth following the cold, the gradual lessening of dizziness, the slackening of muscles once seized by venomous grip. To them, that vial is not just medicine but promise, the promise that humanity has not been left powerless against nature's silent hunters. In communities where antivenom is scarce, survivors often speak with sorrow of the distance between life and science. They recall traveling to hospitals only to find no medicine in stock, forcing families to journey further, sometimes too far. Those who lived through such ordeals speak with a determination to see change, to see access widen so no one else must face the same uncertainty. To them, every saved life is also a reminder of every lost life, every vial administered contrasted with those never delivered in time. Their testimonies become pleas not to governments or organizations alone, but to humanity itself, urging that survival should not be dependent on chance of geography or wealth. The health workers themselves carry their own shadows. A nurse once confessed that she has never forgotten the moment when she turned away a family because there was no antivenom left in the storeroom. She remembers the crying child limp in his mother's arms, remembers the silence that followed when nothing could be done. Yet she continues, season after season, knowing that for every life lost, many more can be saved. Survivors often do not see the exhaustion behind the hands that heal them, but in the retelling, health workers themselves sometimes speak. Their voices, like those of survivors, are part of this long narrative, weary yet unwavering. In some regions, traditions and science are merging slowly. Survivors note how village elders once skeptical of modern hospitals now urge families to seek help swiftly. They describe the change not as sudden, but as gradual persuasion shaped by stories like theirs. The memory of lost lives is not forgotten, but it is reshaped into momentum for change. Communities hold health talks in gathering places, inviting doctors to speak, inviting survivors to share their scars and their wisdom. In these circles of education, the line between past and future bends toward survival. Every correct choice made is evidence that the stories have sunk in where once myths reigned supreme. Survivors also describe gratitude not only for science but for the simplest acts of compassion around it. One man remembers how a nurse sat beside him while antivenom dripped into his veins, telling him stories of her own childhood so that he would not drift into fear. Another remembers how strangers pooled money for his transport. Another still recalls the voice of a driver who refused to charge his family for the desperate midnight ride. These small acts, led upon the steady force of medicine, become inseparable in memory. Medicine carries the venom away, and compassion carries the spirit forward. In time, survivors speak of becoming emissaries for science itself. They urge others to trust doctors, to seek hospitals quickly, to resist wasted minutes. For them, survival is proof made flesh, something no argument can erase. Their stories strengthen the credibility of medical advice, imprinting it in ways that lectures sometimes cannot. Among their peers, their words carry weight heavier than textbooks, because their scars are visible, their voices unshaken. In the hushed glow of evening gatherings, they offer accounts that change minds more profoundly than any pamphlet could. As we listen to their reflections, it becomes clear that the fight against venom is as much communal as it is individual. It is a chain of effort, looping from the heaving chest of a farmer on a dirt road, to the motorbikes that carry him, to the doctors who wait, to the vials preserved in glass, to the scientists in faraway labs who studied tirelessly, to the families who surround him in hope. Each link is necessary, each link dependent on the others. Survivors live because that chain does not break, because enough hands held tightly when danger struck. They remind us, in their voices, that science is not distant but deeply human, growing out of the collective will to preserve each other. And so their stories stretch outward into lessons larger than Snakebite. They remind us that humans survive not alone, but together, that knowledge passed between generations lifts one life after another, that science and compassion together stand as a quiet bulwark against forces as ancient as the earth itself. Survivors embody the delicate triumph of this bulwark. They reveal how fragile bodies can endure venomous shadow when supported by the wisdom of others. The night deepens further as these voices flow, patient, steady, guiding us not into panic but into peace. Their words do not shout. They do not demand. They unfold softly, turning terror into memory, memory into teaching, teaching into rest. In their rhythm, we hear the deep truth that nothing is ever truly conquered, but everything can be met with courage, with knowledge, with connection. And as we listen, the venom itself seems to dissolve into silence, leaving only the slow pulse of humanity's voice, carrying us gently toward calm, toward sleep, toward the realization that even in the face of danger, life flows on. When the survivors speak of the final chapters of their ordeals, their voices adopt a tone that is neither heavy with grief nor bright with triumph, but something quieter, something steadier. It is a tone shaped by the knowledge that they were once on the edge of silence and are now standing firmly again in life. They speak of mornings when they awoke certain they would never see the day, and of nights when they counted their breaths believing each might be their last. They speak of those who carried them, of hands that steadied them, of strangers who lifted them onto motorbikes or carts, of doctors whose quiet reassurances broke through shadows of fear. Many describe that returning home after survival felt different from any return they had ever known. What once was familiar seemed new. The soil beneath their feet seemed richer, the sunlight brighter, the voices of children louder, the laughter of neighbors sweeter. For them the ordinary was no longer ordinary. It was transformed into proof that life itself had chosen to continue. To walk through the doors of their home, to sit down and eat food cooked by a loved one, to hear the simple chatter of family, all these details became priceless. And in retelling their memories, they always lingered on this return, because it was here that they truly understood they had crossed the line between death's threat and life's embrace. Some describe weeping at this return, tears falling not from sorrow but from a depth of relief so great they could no longer hold it. Others fell into silence, resting in the arms of their families without needing words at all. One mother spoke of lying on her mat at home, holding her child against her chest, trembling still from venom and medicine alike, but feeling in that embrace more strength than anything she had ever known. One son described falling to his knees on the threshold of his father's house, pressing his forehead against the ground in gratitude. Over and over, survivors repeat in different ways this truth, that survival reshapes the way the simplest of experiences become treasures. But survival is not only about personal renewal. Survivors step forward afterward to share their stories, repeating the lessons of right and wrong choices. Their voices enter schools, wander through fields, sweep across village gatherings. They tell of panic, of myths, of mistakes. They tell of calmness, of hospitals, of vials of antivenom glistening with quiet promise. In these retellings, they are no longer only victims, they are messengers, carrying wisdom purchased dearly through suffering. What once brought them close to death becomes the gift they offer to others, the chance for a stranger to live because their story was heard. Communities transform through these voices. Where once people hesitated, they now move more swiftly. Where once knives and fire were brought to wounds, now compression and stillness are practiced. Where once families delayed in hopes of ritual, now they travel to hospitals without pause. Survival spreads outward like ripples in water, each story shifting countless decisions beyond its own borders. Survivors know this, and it emboldens them. They know that their scars are no longer only marks of pain, but marks of guidance. They carry their wounds not with shame, but with the sense that humanity itself may walk a steadier path because they endured. On the level of nations and health systems, too, changes unfold slowly but steadily. Governments speak of increasing supplies of antivenom. Health workers train villagers in simple life-saving actions. Researchers explore even better, safer formulations of antidotes. The struggle is far from over, but it moves forward step by step, guided not only by statistics but by the countless voices of those who live to speak. The survivors, when they tell their truth, are not only narrating what happened to them, they are fueling change, transforming echoes of pain into structures of knowledge. There is also the softer aftermath, the inner transformation. Survivors whisper of fear that remains, yes, fear of tall grass, of rustling leaves, of sudden coolness brushing skin. Yet alongside fear, there is respect. Respect for life, respect for the snake as a creature older than humanity, respect for time itself. Though their lives were almost ended, they do not curse endlessly what threatened them. Many say they now see the world more clearly, that danger and beauty walk side by side in every landscape. They understand that fragility is not weakness, but truth. One man described his near-death not as a punishment, but as an awakening. He smiles now more often, he listens longer, he treats every face he meets with gentleness. Venom taught him life's brevity, and thus also its tenderness. For listeners who drift through these stories, their calm delivery transforms what could be a narrative of terror into something soothing, almost sacred. We expect descriptions of venom to strike hard, to quicken breath. Instead, in the survivors' retellings, breath slows, thoughts still. Their stories have undergone their own healing, purged of the sharp edges of panic, polished into wisdom, worn smooth by time like river stones. To hear them is not to tremble but to nod gently, to absorb the lesson without fear. These voices, collected in twilight hours, become lullabies in disguise. And here, at the close of this long journey through fangs and venom, through panic and calm, through fear and survival, we find ourselves at a threshold. The survivors have spoken. The doctors and nurses have spoken. The families, the neighbors, the communities have spoken. Each voice threads into the next, forming not a chorus of sorrow but a cadence of resilience. We are left not with images of pain, but with images of life continuing, of farmers returning to fields, of mothers holding children, of elders telling stories by lantern light. The lesson is clear yet gentle: life is fragile, but it is also enduring. Danger is sudden, but survival is steady. Venom is fierce, but knowledge is stronger when it is shared. Let us pause here, as the voices fade into the silence of the night, and allow their rhythm to carry us into rest. It is not terror we carry from their stories, but gratitude. Gratitude that people suffer and yet rise again. Gratitude that knowledge triumphs over fear. Gratitude that humanity, fragile as it is, continues onward in unbroken continuity. Their journeys join ours now, not to haunt but to soothe, not to frighten but to accompany. And so, to you who have listened through this long unfolding of human struggle and resilience, I offer my gratitude as well. Thank you for allowing these stories to enter your quiet hours, for giving space to the voices of those who almost left us but remained. May their words settle into your thoughts like soft embers, warm but not burning, glowing with the calm reminder that life, though delicate, is profoundly beautiful. Now, as we close, let this calm remain with you. Let the patient rhythm of their voices echo softly within as you drift further into rest. If your eyes grow heavy, do not resist. This has been their gift to you, a lullaby woven from survival, a whisper across distances reminding you that tomorrow waits, and that life, however uncertain, is worth cherishing. Thank you, dear listener, for staying with me through this journey. Wherever you are tonight, I wish you peace, gentleness, and safety. May the stories of survival guide you into dreams free from fear, filled instead with calm, with gratitude, and with rest. Until we meet again, good night, and sleep well.